I want to thank you all for coming. For those who, maybe some of you in the audience have given webinars, you know, basically what we're doing is talking to our computer. And for a person like me who's, you know, used to lecturing to an audience or presenting to an audience, it's tough lecturing to a computer. So what I did is I brought my own audience. So this is who is going to be watching me. And this guy, you got to watch out for. He asks a lot of questions, but this is who's going to be watching. So at least, okay, we're done with that. Anyway, so I want to welcome you to transitioning to digital dentistry. I love digital computer graphics stuff. And so I started my transition in around 2005. And it's an ongoing transition. And I think for most practices, they think it's an all or nothing. And I don't want them to think that. Your rate of transition can be as gradual as you want it to be, and it's okay. But I hope to share some things that will help. In meeting with Eric numerous times, I've seen some of the problems the labs are having with the scans. And from a clinician point of view, I think I kind of know what's going on. Maybe I don't, but this is my advice or point of view. And so I want to thank the sponsors, Microdental, of course, thank you very much, and Modern Dental, thank you. Colten also is being a sponsor because I'm actually going to talk about analog as well. But I mostly want to thank you for giving up your time to be here, and I hope to make it very worthwhile for you. Now, you don't know Mr. Eric Hill, but I've known Eric for a long. This is a surprise to Eric. I didn't show him these slides. So I always think, I've known Eric for a long time. And to me, Eric is like Tony Stark. I mean, I can go to Eric and go, hey, Eric, tell me about zirconia. And he'll reel off everything about zirconia to know. I can ask him about digital scanners or settings, and he just seems to know everything. I mean, he's probably working on time travel or something, but very, very knowledgeable guy. So there you go, Eric, there's you. And another thing about Eric that's very impressive is, and when you have someone who's taking care of your digital workflow and is and really fine tuning things for you, if you have someone creative, he is a guitar creator and designer. Look at this master. When I saw this, to me, this is a piece of art. So if I can have an artist working with me digitally, everything's going to turn out pretty good. So thank you, Eric. Very talented guy. I couldn't even put a string on that thing. So God bless you, man. Great work.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So what are we going to be discussing? We're going to talk about the benefits of digital scanning. And then we're going to talk about prep and margin design. And, you know, we're all dentists on here probably. And so we know about preps and margins. Well, digital is a little different. And I want to share what I've learned over 17 years of doing digital scans in tweaking my technique so I get a better scan. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about possible uses of analog. I don't think you throw it away. I think there are certainly indications for analog impressions. And I want to show you a material I really love to do that. Also, tissue management techniques and tools we'll talk about, how to properly scan. Some real good protocols, I think, and strategies. I don't think this is rocket science to anyone who has a scanner, but it's all about the basics. It really is. If you have those basics down pat, you will be fine. We tend to pass over the basics and go, let's look at the advanced stuff. No, get the basics down pat. And when you think you have them down pat, go back and rehearse them again, okay? Laboratory utilization. What is the laboratory doing with your scans? This might make the light bulb go on for a lot of people because you'll say, gee, I'm sending them this, but they need this. And I think to really troubleshoot, which we will do, I think Eric's input on this, because he totally enlightened me about sending in scans. So, and then we'll have a time for a Q&A at the end, which please send your questions to Maxwell and we'll address as many of them as we can. what is the main benefit of going more digital? See, it's a rapport, right? You're building a better rapport and communication with the patient, but you're actually building a better rapport with the laboratory. And that's also very important. And I say more digital because no matter whether you have a scanner or not, you are already digital. You just don't know it, maybe. Now, I'm sure a lot of us are doing some kind of imaging. Maybe you're not, but a lot of us are. This is imaging I do in my office for someone who comes in. I know they need some kind of crown lengthening. I show them what that's going to look like, and then we show them what they're going to look like with mirrors. It's digital imaging, but your labs are digital. You know, this is what a laboratory, this is what a modern dental laboratory looks like. Whether you send in an impression or not, they're scanning that impression or maybe pouring it up and then scanning it, and then it's a digital process. The key is at the end of the digital process, you get the artists, like the people I use at Micro, to make that restoration come alive. And it's just not a factory milled restoration. Okay. And it's one of those things you'll see Eric walking around talking to people and, getting them to do what they need to do. Sorry, Eric, I think that's the last one we got for you.
The last surprise.
But yeah, but I'm very lucky. I don't live very far from Microdental here in California. And they're very, very nice to let me go in and snoop around and really pick people's brains. And, I see Eric going out, putting out fires, answering every question that comes his way. He just answers and he just knows what to do. So when I was putting together this webinar, I thought, why am I not having the person who knows so much more than I do on this webinar? And I'll talk obviously a lot more about the clinical stuff, but he's going to share a tremendous amount of knowledge and really, really listen. He's got a lot of great things to say here. Now, intraoral scanning, what are the benefits? It is real-time evaluation and feedback, and I think this is probably one of the most important things. I mean, if you take a scan of your preparation, you can look at it, and here's the humbling experience when you start scanning. All our preps look bad. It's such a humbling experience when you scan your prep and you look at it so huge and magnified. God, I thought I cut a smooth prep. Well, guess what? It's life. Don't let that get you down. We all experience it, and we still experience it. Sometimes I think I cut the most beautiful prep I scan, and I go, "Oh my God!" It's what it is. I mean, when you see something that up close. But if I can see a scan, take it and go, that margin isn't that easy to see. I can go in, refine, maybe do some tissue retraction, maybe refine it, and then rescan that just one area and send the lab that. And the lab will love you for it. Okay. The next thing is that wow factor, right? And people talk about the wow factor and all this equipment is such a wow factor. And yes, it is, but that's not the reason to get it. That is kind of the add-on, the nice thing down the road. It doesn't matter if your patients are impressed with your digital technology. If you can't make a beautiful restoration and have it fit well and function right, doesn't matter if you're taking an impression or digital. So the wow factor is important, but to a degree, okay? There's less mess in your office with a digital scanner, but than all this impression material, but there's a different clutter because you either have carts to pull around or you have laptops with the scanners. So it's a different kind of clutter. It's a nicer clutter, nicer looking clutter, but there's still stuff in your office. It is probably a faster turnaround time in the lab, but for me personally, I've never been impressed by speed. Speed always equated to maybe a little lesser quality than I wanted. So speed isn't number one in my repertoire for what I want a laboratory to be to me. I want them quality first. I'll wait a few more days. So, but you probably will get it because you're going to digitally send them. You're going to electronically send them. There's no delivery. UPS is not involved, or FedEx. So it's faster that way, communication. They're easier to store their digital files. They're not models, and don't we love that, right? Who doesn't want to get rid of those models in their office? Your staff likes it more because they're probably going to be taking the predominant scans in your office, but they won't like it at first because there's a learning curve, and you have to understand that. There is a learning curve with digital scanning, and don't get frustrated. Just make sure you scan all the time. You don't have to scan on patients, scan on each other. Have an afternoon, instead of an office meeting, you have a scanning meeting, and everyone scans each other, and you get used to doing the process. So what are the drawbacks? Well, it's technology. There's always a cost, right? Are there subscriptions? These are the things, all the different scanners, and there's so many great scanners on the market. They all have their own little subscriptions or costs. So you need to evaluate that, see what works for you, your ROI, and all that kind of stuff. It is offset a little bit by impression material costs, but how much that, according to your office, you'll know that a lot more than me. Now, like I said, the learning curve. Now, it's not as bad as when I took up digital scanning almost 2 decades ago. I mean, at that time, your scanner, you scanned, you picked up the mirror, the tongue, the cheek. You picked up the person in the next room in your scan. It was just not that good. The technology is so good now. And there's different filters you can use in the software. So it's really come a long, long way. It has for a while, actually. But I want to get this out of the way. Going digital is not an all or nothing. Like I said before, I don't, when I hear these people talk about, oh, I got a digital scanner and I don't do impressions anymore. I go, what do you do about the people you can't scan? There's some mouths that you hard to scan everything. Now, if you're talking about a tooth or something, okay, but how about if you're doing full art? You can't scan everybody. At least I can't, okay? So I don't have a problem taking an analog. And I've been doing this a long time. Don't think it's an all or nothing. It's not. And it's not one or the other. You can have both. And I think having both enables you to do the best for that patient. Okay. Remember this, digital scanners won't make you a better dentist. Okay. It won't make your dentistry better. But if you take advantage of all it has to offer, it will make you a better dentist. And the feedback, the instant feedback, the ability to adjust your prep, all that stuff, the technology built with scanners now, occlusal analysis, all this stuff is great. And it will make us better dentists if we understand it and we utilize it. So what are your expectations? Okay. Now, Eric, what do you think of this? They buy a scanner, I buy a scanner, and all I do is I think I have to wave it over the teeth and I get this miraculous scan. How often does that happen?
0% of the time.
There you go. And I can tell you from me attempting it, it has happened 0% of the time. There's a lot of training, and it's constant training, and that's what it takes. So your expectation level, it's like when a patient comes in for veneers, for have a smile done, the first question I ask them is, so, one of the things is, why are they here? What are they looking for? When they talk to me about a smile, I said, what are your expectations? Because I need to know if I can meet them. So expectations are key. Don't think this is the key to the kingdom. It's not. It's a great tool, but you got to know how to use it. So I have this question for Eric. So how is scanning different than taking an impression from a lab point of view?
The main difference really, and this is usually the light bulb moment for somebody taking scans, is that
for me.
What's that?
It was for me when you told me this.
Yeah. So when you're taking scans, you have to remember that when taking normal analog impressions, the impression material is mechanically displacing the tissue and exposing the margin much better than if it were to be taken with a digital scanner. So in digital scanning, because you don't have that mechanical aspect to taking the impression, you have to make sure that the unit is exposed by something like tissue retraction or laser or something like that. If not, then you're going to have situations where you think the margin is clear, but it isn't, because you don't have that extra level of mechanical displacement. So that's the main thing, is making sure that you're displacing the tissue in a manner that is normal, like traditional impressions, except doing it digitally. Right.
And when Eric told me this, when I had this conversation with Eric, and he was showing me these scans he was getting in from dentists and going, what am I going to do with this? And I go, I don't get it. And then Eric said this to me. He goes, I don't think dentists think about this. And it was that impression material is also, because it's physically helping you to displace the tissue. Mm-hmm. I said to myself, oh my God, what a light bulb moment. As a dentist, as a clinician, most of us wouldn't think that way necessarily. And it was a great moment. It's the other point of view. And that's what's so great about having a great relationship with your laboratory. Their point of view is valuable, if not sometimes more valuable than what I'm thinking. And when he told me this, I thought about this story. I don't know if most people have heard of this story. Have you ever heard of the story that of the truck that's trying to go under this overpass and they can't quite fit? So they stop short, they get out there thinking, people come by and they say, well, maybe we can take the back off the truck, or maybe we can raise the overpass. And this little girl comes by and goes, why don't you just let the air out of the tires? And it's like, it's a light bulb moment. And that's exactly what I think the big misconception is. People think that these scanners can see through soft tissue. No, soft tissue gets in the way, just like saliva and all these other things. So you have to open that surface up so margins are visible to the eye. So if you can't see the margins, neither can the scanner. So that's not going to give me a good scan. But using different methods of tissue retraction, this will give me a great scan. Okay? Well, if I scan right. So once you understand this and you make these adjustments clinically, if you need to, then it's just about scan reps. It's about you constantly scanning, whether it's you or your staff. And my feeling on this is, although doctors delegate, and I guess you have to consider your state, maybe some states are different than others, but if you can delegate these things to staff members, I highly think the doctor needs to be very proficient at it too. And the doctor needs to check the scans before they go to the lab. I think one of the things that I saw in some of the scans Eric was showing me, I go, there's no way a doctor saw this and sent this in. There's no way. So I think maybe the staff thought they had what they needed and they sent it in, not realizing they needed something else. And it's just because of training. The more training your staff gets, the more they're going to be able to identify these issues. And then it's always great to have another pair of eyes looking at it and going, yeah, that's great. Or, oh, can you just get that a little bit? Because this is a different way to communicate to the laboratory. And we need to identify those changes we need to make and do them. But the constant training and the constant rep scanning is what you need to do. Now, identifiable margins, this is the common scenario, and it has to do with how we're taught to prep. One of these is more of a chamfer or slight shoulder or a feather. And a feather in dental school, when I was in dental school in the 80s, we called it like the infinite bevel, right? Because basically you're just prepping as gingerly as you can go, letting the lab identify your margin, and there's your crown. Chamfer is a very distinct margin, okay? Now, what you also have to think about, we've had material changes in dentistry, okay? Not a lot of metals being used. And with a chamfer, you're gonna get a beautiful restoration like this. Eric, are they gonna be able to get that back in zirconia?
On the left, yes. On the right, no, definitely not.
Right, and why? Because of this, right, Eric? You gotta bulk it up.
Yeah, so the main thing there is there's certainly milling tolerances. So if you're relying on the feather edge margin to be the thickness of your margin, of course there's nothing behind that like a chamfer. So you're having to rely on minimum thickness in the margin for milling. So if the minimum thickness for milling is something like 0.2 of a millimeter, you can't like grind that in to make it like a nice even margin, because if you go below that tolerance, you're going to end up creating cracks or whatever else might happen. But if you have something like a chamfer, as you can see in the left, there's room behind the margin. So you actually have proper margin thickness and like a perfect transition there between tooth and the crown.
And if the lab technician has to use that feather and then they make it a little bulky at the margin, if they conscientiously try to thin it down, most of the time it's going to crack, right?
Yeah, because you're getting below that minimum thickness, and once you get below that, all bets are off.
And you know why people still embrace the feather is because we're used to PFM. And I don't know about you guys, but in the days when I did PFM, which wasn't very much in my career, I did it very early in my career, and then I pretty much abandoned it for all ceramic, and I've been that way ever since. And so that's like 30 years of all ceramic. So the metal, I used to get a PFM back. Sometimes those metal margins, you could actually cut your finger on them, and they were so sharp, right? You can make metal very thin and very sharp for a feather margin. You can't with the most common material replacing PFM is zirconia, right? Eric, when you say, or Emax?
What's that?
What would you say is pretty much the dominant material that has replaced PFM? Zirconia or something like Emax?
Definitely zirconia. Zirconia is probably 70% of it, and the 30% maybe is Emax. But those two are, in general, they're milled, so you have to rely on being able to mill things in minimum thicknesses, and you're sort of you're having to prep in a way that gives the lab the right amount of thickness at those margins to have proper transitions.
Right. So, the margin has to change. Your margin design has to change a little bit, not only because scanning needs to really pick it up well, but the materials have changed on us. Yep. So we have to change accordingly. And it's funny, I found this article, and it's the effect of margin design on the fraction of zirconia. And the conclusion was that chamfer margin design give the strongest prints. So makes sense. So just know, if you're a feather person, you kind of have to start doing a chamfer. And if you've never done one before, practice on plastic teeth, practice on extracted teeth. For a lot of my career, I would practice on other things before I took it clinically, especially early in my career. And still to this day, if I have a difficult case to veneer, I might actually ask the lab to give me 2 sets of models, the pre-ops, and I will actually prep one just to know where I'm going in my head. And it makes me clinically faster. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Here's an x-ray. This is actually was a patient in last week, and I was, she was getting some checkup x-rays, and I said, this is a perfect example. These are chamfer or kind of shoulder margins. These are very cleansable. If this is bulked out because it's, it's an all ceramic material and I ended in a feather, it wouldn't be cleansable like that. It wouldn't be something nice and smooth. This is going to be very hygienic for the patient and not give them problems. And you don't want to introduce dentistry that's going to give them hygiene issues. As far as burrs, we can run the gamut here. Basically, good chamfer burrs. You're going to go with the 0.12s to the 0.16s or the 0.18s in diameter kind of thing. As far as occlusal reduction, I mostly use the first 3. Okay, I have this on hand every now and then, but I mostly use the first 3. This just imparts the really good contour to your tooth as far as reducing the tooth in the proper planes. Okay, and I'll show you that in a second, what I mean by that. Then we're going to talk about an 8-fluted carbide. You said, what are you prepping with a carbide for? Okay, give me a second. I'll show you in a slide or two, and also with a disc. These are the little tips and tricks I've learned way over the years that have helped my restorations be better for a lot of reasons. When I talk about the reductions in planes, this is key. Know how the restorations can be made. Okay, you want even thickness. If this margin was not this low and was straight across, you would have such thin ceramic material here, it would fracture. So according to the opposing planes is how you need to reduce the tooth. And again, this is basic stuff we all know, but we forget because everything gets so crazy and busy. So we forget. So it's just great to remind yourself, and these are the fundamentals, the basics that I constantly love going over myself to remind me of things, okay? Now, I showed you the disc. Now, when I prep a tooth, I don't know about anybody out in the webinar land here, but I have nicked the tooth next to it. My burr has accidentally hit the tooth next to it. I know I'm probably the only one, but I have to take care of that. I can't leave a nicked interproximal and have the lab try to make me a contact for that. So I always smooth interproximals of the teeth next to it, the adjacent teeth, okay? I use this 3M extra thin disc. This is the same disc I use to recontour veneers. It's a great disc, smooth preps. You can do tons of stuff with these discs. I love it. And I'll explain to you this margin, this model work in a second, but look at the interproximal and how smooth I made it. The contact that's going to be created is going to be beautiful. It's going to be nice. It's going to be solid. There won't be any spaces because I nicked the tooth. And this is what you want. Now, how about that nice sharp margin? That nice sharp edge, easy to identify with a digital scanner and resulting software. How do you get that? You always don't get that. Sometimes the root is literally regular. Sometimes the root, there's stuff on the root. Who knows? This is where I found that this carbide burr is very valuable. Now, I'm not grinding it. It's more of a very light touch around the sulcus, And I just go a little bit around, and it creates a very smooth junction where my margin and the root begin. I can see it very clear. Little tip, you don't always do it. You don't always need it. But when you need to do something like that, it's invaluable. Interproximal smoothing. I mean, Eric, when you get a scan in and you have these rough interproximals and you're going to create a restoration, what's that like? I mean, do you make a call to the doc or?
Yeah, in general, we would have to, because there's a lot of occasions where I see significant nicks on that contact. And if there's a significant nick on there, we can't make a crown that fits with it perfectly. So you're going to have gaps. So in those scenarios, we do have to call the doctor, or we say we're going to smooth some things out, and then might have to do some contact adjustments in the office. But yeah, that's something you definitely should pay attention to, is making sure the contacts are nice and smooth, because that will certainly make the whole crown go that much smoother.
Absolutely.
No pun intended.
Yeah. And thanks for talking about my preps. But no, anyway, here's the thing. A smooth prep and a smooth interproximal, you will never have insertion issues.
Yep.
And that's not kind of my saying when I talk about like veneer preps. Smooth preps don't have insertion issues. Smooth contacts, the restoration doesn't have insertion issues. And we often omit that step. Why? Because we're always in a rush. I mean, we do. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves as dentists to be very timely and quick for the patient, all this stuff. But take a little more time and make it that much better, and the result gets that much better.
Can I comment on the last photo, Chris?
Absolutely. You want me to put that photo back?
Yeah, please.
All right, let's see if I can do it.
I think it's the back button, may or may not.
This one? Is this
That's fine. That's perfect. Okay. Yes. So those preps, in my opinion, are perfect for a couple reasons. Firstly, it's a nice chamfer margin and everything's very clear. But secondly, because you rolled the cusp tips. So if you have a sharp edge on a cusp tip, what that presents in the lab is something, yes, if it's a sharp cusp tip, in the lab, we have to overcome that with milling parameters. And that means you're going to have little gaps or little pockets inside the tooth. So if it's nice and smooth like that, you're not going to have those pockets. And in situations where you're shy on room, because you have those little edges there, you're actually going to lose more room. So if you round those cusp tips over a little bit, then all of a sudden you're not going to have to worry about additional gap that might be created by the milling process.
And I'll tell you, this patient was very difficult to prep. Mr. Typodont, very difficult to prep. That tongue kept getting in the way, and it was tough. But yeah, I did my best. So thanks. So that's, I mean, great. I mean, that's so important, because people don't realize milled restorations are made differently, and taking those things really into account. Diamond strips, very important. Your lab has to be able to see a clear delineation between the teeth. Diamond strips, so important. I like these strips. I believe these are Ultradent strips. They have these little openings in them, and the serration just really goes really well. The creating of the space. And so when you scan it, or in this case, model, and I showed you a model like this before, I'm going to explain it in a second what that's about. But look, you can see the spaces, and the lab needs to see that digitally as well. Okay. Yeah.
So because of that, if there are no gaps, so there's a couple reasons for that. Obviously, if there's no gaps and you have the teeth that are joined, there's no way for us in the lab to create like single dies off of that model, because the teeth are exactly in, they're connected. So there's no clear delineation between, let's say, 8 and number 9. So when you go to separate those to make single dies, all of a sudden you get to a point where there's no distinct margin. So if you have them separated, like Chris shows here in this slide, that makes the margin that much clearer, and creating dies in the lab is not going to be a crapshoot. So that's definitely the right thing to do.
Yeah, because otherwise you're just guessing.
Right. Otherwise, you have a solid model and you're creating things that necessarily tell where that distinct margin is.
And for the dentist, that's a lot of interproximal finishing and insertion. And that's the tissue you don't want to harm, is that interproximal.
Right.
Insertion. You get a lot of dark triangles after that if you do. So I want to talk about Colten, who is very generous in sponsoring this webinar as well. Colten is offering the attendees, if you use this little promo code, they're offering a little promo for you. I've used a lot of impression materials over the years. Name it, I've used it. I'm on the editorial board of Reality, so I get a lot of products in to evaluate, and impression materials especially. And I just really love the Affinis line. When I got it at first, the flow on it was so good, I thought there was a mistake. Impression materials flow well, but this stuff flows really well. And that's one of the things that caught me. So not only did the different viscosities flow just so smoothly, but the detail was still there and captured beautifully. But when do I use impression material? This is just how I personally do it. And you can say, oh, you're crazy. Okay, I'm crazy. That's not the first time I've been called something like that. But I digitally, someone comes in for a single visit restoration, because I have in-office CAD/CAM, I have had since 2005, right? So I do single visit restorations if the patient wants it. I'd say about 70% of my patients want it. The other 30% still want 2 visits. Years ago, it used to be 50-50. Now they're kind of more inclined, especially during the COVID. They were home, they got the time, they figured they'll wait, right? So, but everything will be done digitally. I'll prep the tooth, then I'll scan it and do all my scanning I need to do. And then I stick an impression in. This is the heavy light body of the Affinis impression materials. And while that is sitting in the mouth 4 to 5 minutes, I quickly will design the restoration. Sometimes not quickly. Sometimes I'll design it and I'll get halfway there and the impression will be ready to pull out. So I might just pull it out. Then the restoration gets sent to the mill to be milled. At that time, I take the impression, go to the lab, and I quickly put wax around the margin. What are you doing with that wax? Well, I need a die trimmed tooth, and I'm not about to pour up this model and slice it and all this. So this is the poor man's die trim, wax. Put wax, you pour up the model and facet stone, pull off the wax, and now you have access to all your margins. And you can see them. So when you make the restoration, you can see that your margins are close, especially interproximal. That's the big value for me in this. Interproximal, I can see. I can also adjust the contacts. I am not one of those people that like trying something in and adjusting it and doing all that stuff in front of the patient. If I have to start adjusting contacts and the internal aspect, I don't like that. To me, that's not the way I want to practice. So when I have these restorations, they just go boom and they go in because I've adjusted the contacts perfectly. The margins all fit. Now my question is, what do I want to put it in with, right? Am I adhesively putting it in or am I using some other kind of cement? That's it. And people say, well, there's resin printers. Okay, I got that too. Some of these are toys. Some of these are, will benefit you. You have to look before you look at your ROI, look at what makes sense for you, because it will make sense for some practices and it won't make sense for others. So just do your due diligence, talk to your accountant if you need to. Pouring up in quickset stone, taking that impression, pouring up in quickset stone, I can have that model ready before that restoration's out milled. And then I fit it, do all my adjustments, goes in the oven and it goes in the patient's mouth. I can do it very predictably this way, and I don't have to worry about post-op problems. I don't have to worry about open contacts. I don't have to worry about a lot of stuff. Now, again, one of the things about the Affinis impression materials, this is heavy light body. Well, if I have to take an full arch impression, I always use their medium body. And it flowed really well. So I thought to myself, let me try when I'm doing this in office, restorations for patients. Let me try using their medium body instead of the light body. And it flowed beautifully around the preps, getting all the detail, getting all the flash. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, oh, this is great. And I can still do a full arch if I need to, if I can't digitally scan for some reason. So yeah, I still use impression material. I don't, I'm not an all or nothing guy. I'm going to use what's best for the situation. And I think if you take that view of it, you won't pressure yourself. And I think there's a lot of pressure to do this or do that. You don't have to. You can do what works for you, and please do. So let's talk about how to take care of this tissue. Here's how I do it. First of all, the patient has to have healthy tissue. Start with healthy tissue. You're going to avoid a lot of issues. Number one, okay. Always try to keep your margins super equigingival. Now, Eric, how many cases, or I don't know if you can comment, how many times do you see margins super gingival versus below? And do you see just a trend of people prepping more super equigingival margins?
I would say that the majority is equigingival. I'd say that maybe 10% are supragingival. Those are the ones that the folks love to work on, of course, because it's cut and dry and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about where that margin is. Equigingival can get a little tricky for the obvious reasons. Of course, you have some fluid in there that the scanner's not going to understand how to look past unless you have very good tissue and fluid maintenance. But yeah, I think that probably the majority are equigingival or potentially even subgingival, and those are the problem cases.
Yeah, and they're problems for everybody. I mean, I don't care how long you've been doing dentistry, those supragingival margins, and if you think about it, dentists of today, we are redoing dentistry. That is what we do. It's not like we're getting these teeth with an amalgam in them and they maybe break a cut. Sure, you might get that, but you're getting a lot of old restorations are replacing that were placed subgingival. And so we're having to deal with tissue. And that's why, thank God, there's a lot of great things to help us. But we are dealing with redoing a lot of dentistry, okay? I evaluate the tissue. If there's a lot of redundant tissue, I use my laser. I use diode laser. I've been using a diode laser since the late 90s. I think the first time I got my hands on a diode was around 95, 96. And the thing was huge and, don't buy technology when I buy technology. I first came out and I think the laser cost me like 28 or 30 grand. Now you can get 3 or 4 diode lasers for that. So but I used it till it died. So I made sure I got my money out of it. Then I pack a 0 or 1 cord depending upon the sulcus. Okay. And after that, I prep and I create my final margin. If I had to do a buildup, whatever, you need to do to get the prep finalized. And then I evaluate for final retraction. Maybe I need to pack a little larger cord, which I will take out before I digitally scan. Or if everything's okay and visible, but maybe there's a little bleeding, I'll use Expasil, which is a putty retraction system. And I've been using that since it came into the country. It was originally bought, I think, by Kerr from a company in Europe. They brought it in, called it Expasil, and sold it like crazy. It's now bought by Acteon, I believe, and Kerr has their own material. But putty retraction to me is amazing, and it's great. If you can get really good at packing cord and good at placing these pastes, you will get great digital scans all the time. You just will. Okay, diode lasers. I have a couple. I still have this one. This isn't even made anymore. Now this isn't the $28,000 one. This is my another one I bought since that one died. It's a Zap laser, I think it is. I don't know. It's in that operatory right there, and it still works. It's still great, and I'm going to use it till it dies. A really beautiful laser though is Ultradents. And again, there are a lot of diode lasers out there. So just these are my preference based on, maybe I like the looks better. That's what our preferences are on, right? They all kind of do great things, but I just like the look of it. And I like just the framework of it and how it sits. I really appreciate it. And then there's handheld stuff now. So there's a lot of things to evaluate. If you don't have a diode laser, really, and you're using electrosurge, because I did very early in my career, there's no going back. Once I started using a diode from electrosurge, I was not going back. Now, some people are great with electrosurge. I just never was. Maybe that was my problem. Okay. But diode lasers, man, they just do a great job, and they're great with hygiene too. Retraction cord. Ultradent makes great retraction cord. I use gingerbraid as well, and it's either a plain cord or usually I soak it with Hemodent, which is aluminum chloride. I use that a ton. Now, Eric, do you know, like when you get a scan, do you know your doctors well enough where you know if they use cord all the time? Like
Yep.
people who get consistently great scans, do you know what they're doing to get those great scans?
Yeah, well, firstly, you can see remnants of the cord on occasion. So
good.
that certainly gives us a clue whether or not they used it. But it's extraordinarily easy to tell when somebody's using proper tissue retraction techniques or laser. Laser is obviously very obvious, but when you see a very nice margin with a millimeter or two space beside it, you know that something was used. And in those scenarios, those are drop right in type of crowns, and those are the ones we're after.
Yeah, and that's what we all should be after. I mean, I think, sometimes as a dentist, we get so hung up on, getting done on time, because everything's a schedule, right? Getting done on time, or maybe the patient wasn't that great with their hygiene before they came back. So there's this constant pressure, but once you develop a protocol and you do it right and you see how it can be done, there's no going back, and it makes everyone's life easier. And yeah, it's great. So cord placement, and this is another thing. People talk about cord placement with impressions. I use a lot of cord when prepping because it protects the tissue. Now, this was a case of prepping to close the diastema with a veneer case. Now, you want to prep slightly below the gum line to create the proper emergence, because obviously if you ended your margin at the tissue line, you would create porcelain overhang. This creates a nice emergence of porcelain out of the tissue, and it keeps that papilla nice and closed. Now, I've already prepped it, and you can see the tissue is not bleeding or touched. It's because when you put that cord in there and you use a thin diamond burr, you're not going to touch the tissue, and the cord displaces it. So if you're using cord in prepping, you're going to save a lot of headache later because you won't be cutting up tissue, and you already have retraction. So in these cases, I'll prep the case, and if that cord is still in there, I'll just maybe put a little Expasil on there to give me a little bit more, and then I'll start scanning, or if I need to take a regular impression. But cord to protect is as valuable as cord to insert, okay? Or cord to take a scan. Paste retraction, I mean, I remember this tooth. This was many years ago. So I used my diode laser, and I nicked it a little bit with my burr. I did burr curettage, remember that? And I just packed it with Expasil. 2 minutes later, rinsed it out, and now I have such visible margins, I can even see them with my bad eyes. So, I mean, Eric, wouldn't you like this every time?
That would be great.
Well, I would personally love to do this every time, but you have to be, I don't want to say aggressive, but you have to be firm in handling tissue to get what you need, okay?
Yeah.
And here's Expasil. And the great thing is this putty in it it's not hemodent, but it's aluminum chloride. And I like aluminum chloride. I know there's other things like ferric sulfate and other things people use to stop bleeding. For me, ferric sulfate always got gunky and clotted up stuff and just got messy. And tastes awesome, by the way, if you've ever tasted it. It's horrible. So that's why I have always liked hemodent and stuff like that. And the fact that Expasil and probably a lot of the other pastes more have aluminum chloride really is advantageous for me. So we're not going to really talk about which specific scanner you should get. We'll mention some, but this is mostly a scanner independent webinar. But I've been using the Medit in addition to my in-office CAD-CAM system. And this is just a little promo. I think it's great. It's a really great little scanner, and the software is really good. There's tons of these scanners out. It's amazing, but I really like the Medit. It's lightweight. It does a really good job. Some little things about the fact that you can switch the tip one way or another, so you have access to the buttons. I think it's a really great thing, and so I really like it. And maybe one of the ones you should check out. Talk to Microdental. Here it is right here, because it's here. So now when you're ready to scan, so you've handled the tissue, you're all ready to go. Now we're ready to scan. Your patient should be in the chair and they should be comfortable. And you see the laptop and the scanner. Have your office set up so it's very easy to take that laptop out and scan. Whether you keep it on there, or I have these little cubbies and I can slip the laptop right in there, close it and slip it in there, and then put the scanner in there as well. So if you have stuff like that, that's really cool. Now, as far as the the cheek retractors, what you're going to find in the beginning, you're going to use them a lot. I think as you progress, you're going to use them a little less and a little less. Again, depending upon what you're scanning. But a lot of times you're going to find that the cheek is a great stability for the back of the scanner. It holds it, because the best way to scan would be if you had your druthers right on a type it on, you could, instead of doing this where you could hold it like this and balance it. Well, the cheek is that balancing point against the back of the scanner. It's that other point of holding it versus your hand, and you got this. So it's a lot of times you're going to find you're not going to use as many cheek retractors as you think. I think in the beginning it's a really good thing, but as you progress, you'll find you probably use it a little less. If you don't, that's fine. Whatever works for you. But that's just what I found in my journey. And in cheek retractors, you know, there's Ultradent has the umbrellas, which are really, really nice. And of course, the Optradate, which is very, very popular, which I use a ton of as well. Steps to perform before scanning. Now, Eric, can you tell if someone's scanning with a dirty tip?
Well, we have a good idea because the scan will certainly show those different little
like blemishes, or bumps.
Yeah, blemishes, or just it's a scan that looks textured when it shouldn't look textured. You'll have all kinds of little weird things going on there. So yes, absolutely, we can tell, and we can tell when there's light in the room too. So if there's too much ambient light, or there's a headlamp or something like that, which should not be used in these situations, if that is used, the scan will also look textured, and there'll be sharp edges where there isn't sharp edges, and there's all kinds of weird little things that happen there. So I would certainly recommend not doing anything other than regular ambient light, and make sure your tip is clean. If those two things are squared away, then the scan's gonna look much better.
Yeah, that's good. Dry field is very important. I always dry the field before you suction. Do whatever you need to do. Really dry it well. If you have wet areas like this, again, these aren't hard tissue scanners. You know, they're going to pick up stuff. They're going to scan. They're not going to be able to scan through the saliva or things like that. So you got to get that stuff out of the way. And what Eric just alluded to is another thing we forget is we forget to turn off the overhead light, and we forget to turn off our headlamps. And light and scanners don't mix. Positioning. This is going to be something, it's trial and error. Sometimes I will actually scan from the front. And you say, well, don't you have your staff do it? I personally like doing a lot of stuff myself. And it's just the way I've always practiced dentistry. So it's just me. But most of you are going to delegate this to the staff, and you probably should. But in saying that, you need to get the staff properly trained and continually trained. There's never enough scanning training you can do. There's never enough scans you can do, okay? You can always get better and more efficient and so forth. And sometimes I'll sit, and really sometimes I might sit facing the patient like this and have my laptop right here. I wish they could wear a hat and I could put it right on top of there, but they haven't made. Eric, you know they can get one of those, a hat they can put, and I can put the laptop right here.
Sounds like a great invention. They probably have it on Amazon.
I'm going to check when we get off this webinar.
Real quick point about that, if you could go back.
Yeah. Yep.
It's good to note that when you're scanning, you should certainly not be looking in the mouth when you're scanning. You should be looking at the screen so you can see exactly what the scanner is seeing.
Right.
I think the reason why we get a lot of flash on certain scans is because you're looking at the mouth and you're scanning the mouth. So when you get a piece of cheek in there or a finger or something like that, all of a sudden you have to clean that up on the scan. So if you're looking at the screen itself and you're following the screen, you know that you're in the right area and you're not going to get as much flash.
Yeah. Good point. Great point. Now, also, don't be in a rush. I've seen these videos, on YouTube and places, and people are like, oh, look at this. I scanned this and this. I scanned this in 40 seconds. And then they go back, now I'm going to get the other areas. So you didn't scan it in 40 seconds. I think we're intimidated by this stuff. Like, we're not living up to these standards of scanning so fast. Don't worry about scanning fast. Care about scanning well. Speed will come. Okay. In the Medit software, which is really great, and I'm sure in other softwares as well, they have these little videos. So if you forget, like, okay, I'm going to scan a quadrant, how should I do it? They have these little videos kind of playing in the corner. It would be like right here on your screen, you know, on your scanning screen. And they kind of play and remind you what to do, which is great. Now, a lot of these softwares have it. There's a lot of great software that comes with different scanners, and they're all really good. So, but this is what Medit has, which I think is really nice, because I need to be reminded all the time. If you're doing full arch and things like that, you know, just little tips, and it shows you how to position the scanner so you actually know how to move it. I think that's great too. So little things like this really go a long way. Don't ignore these things in the software. They're there for a reason, to help. Now, software, like I said, remember when I was saying I could scan the next room with the other scanners, right? The filters on these scanners are so good. The AI, people call it, right? If I click a setting, I can scan just the teeth, no gums. Or maybe I'll change the setting and get a little gum. It all depends. You can also scan out colors by the smart color filter. So software is very good. You need to go in and tweak your settings a little bit, figure out what your settings should be. But that's really a great part of them as well. Now, here we're doing a quadrant scan, okay? Now, one of the things, and Eric, you were telling me this, and when we were discussing scanning, whether it's a full arch or a quadrant, you always do that complete pass first.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's so you have cross arch accuracy. Imagine building a suspension bridge, but not throwing the ropes across first. So you have to think of it that way. You want to throw the ropes across first, and then fill in the gaps and sort of put down the steps, and then you'll have an accurately stitched arch.
Right. And it makes total sense, but we don't think of it as dentists because we're not thinking like that. And we're not thinking about, we're just thinking, oh, this digital thing, oh, it's great, it's magic, and I can go. But there's a rhyme and a reason for how things should be done. So if we're scanning a quadrant, and again, I'm using a typodont, I'm using this one here. The first is just that scan. Now, one thing you will learn if you scan typodonts versus models is typodonts are horrible to scan because of the material it's made of. You're going to miss a lot of those interproximals. You won't miss that many in the mouth, guaranteed, but you might miss some. So the next thing you're usually going to do is go back and get those. Now, again, your software will usually give you a playback of what you just did. So again, you can learn by critiquing your technique. Well, am I holding it right? Am I angling it right? Am I moving too jittery? Am I moving smooth enough? And by watching you how you scan, you're going to get better too. Use these tools to get better. They're there. They're all there for you. So now we're doing the interproximal scan pass. And there's a couple of ways to do it. This is taking the scanner and literally just moving along the arch and rotating it and to get the mesial and distal interproximal. So as you go along the arch, you're going like this. And that's what you're doing. And getting all those nice interproximal areas and making a very clean model.
Yeah. And another point about that, make sure your technique is efficient enough that you're not going over areas too many times, because that makes the file size very big, and then you'll get into certain issues where you might have like a double scan or something. So as long as you're making efficient movements and you're not going over areas way too much, you'll have a nice clean scanner on double scans at the end. So that'll show that.
I have that coming up because that is so important. And because I experienced that early in my digital journey because we didn't have those abilities in the software and the scanners. So I saw double scans quite a bit because I was over scanning. Because I think I'm a chronic over scanner. I don't know if there's a chronic over scanner group, but I should probably join it. So if you do that, you'll get models like this. Okay. And that's what the lab wants. I mean, yes, does it have to be perfect, kind of like that? No, come on. I mean, I did it for the webinar and I was very meticulous. Real life is a little different, but you got to get those critical areas. There's another strategy, though, to capture the interproximals. Instead of going back and forth, some of you might find this a little tedious, right? So if you have those interproximals that you missed, you just bring in the scanner, and it's right now, it's going right flat at the buccal surface. Turn it about 30 to 45 degrees, and then go mesial. Now I picked up all the distal interproximals. Then flip it and go distal, and now you've picked up the mesial, and now your interproximals are all nicely scanned.
Yep.
Again, this just doesn't happen where you're like, boom, boom, I'm doing it. You're going to probably have to practice this, and it's going to get frustrating. And you're going to want to throw this against the wall a number of times. It's okay. Frustration is part of the curve of learning. But once you get it, and once you get the technique down, you will just love it and never go back. And then you'll start using the tools in the software to get even better at what you're what you're sending to the lab and all this other stuff. Now, what Eric was alluding to was when you have a prep tooth, you want to scan the prep tooth or teeth first. Get the contacts, get everything scanned. And once you have everything scanned, and you're going to check in your software, there's things called reliability maps, which is that green, and it will show you anything green, good, red, bad. Then you actually will lock the area where you prep, and you will not get any more scan data over that area. So no double scans. And this is the way to do it so you don't run the risk of a not so perfect scan, then a tooth is made to and it doesn't fit. It's because the scanning data was way too high. And you know what? If you can put less scanning data in the computer, it will like you more too.
Right, and that also comes down to file size too. So
right.
If you're scanning over areas a lot, you're going to get a big, huge file size, and that may take a while to send. Firstly, secondly, if there's a lot of flash on the scan and you don't have clean scan borders like that, it can actually crash design softwares too. So in those scenarios, and it should also be noted that these are all perfect scan techniques, and we all know, and I get a million scans every single day that aren't perfect. That does not mean the case is going to be stopped. In general, we can get around it and we can make things work. This is just for situations that are, perfect situations. So
right.
While this might be tedious and it might seem like something that's not efficient to do, you don't have to go into so much detail. It's great if you do, but if not, we can always deal with it in the lab. We have 5 different softwares to deal with in the lab that I can clean up scans with if we need to. But just know that everything becomes smoother when you start dialing in your process and you have everything sort of efficient and quick. Once you get into that zone, you'll be scanning quickly and you'll be able to clean up your scans quickly. The lab will get it. There'll be less calls to and from the lab. And you'll have perfect margins because you're using the proper techniques on, displacing the tissue. But once you get those techniques down, which will take a little bit of time, you'll have great results and they'll be very consistent. But in the meantime, as you're learning, we can still take those scans, and in most situations, we can get along with it. So this is not something where you have to be perfect from day one. It's best to do scans as the best you can, and then communicate with the lab on whether or not those scans are as they should be. If they're not as they should be, then somebody like me will be able to kind of dial in that process with you. And then we'll make sure that you're doing things efficient for you and for us, and making sure that the results are as you expect.
Yeah, communication is key. Absolutely. And we're showing the double scan, and that's why we're doing the locking of your prep. Okay. Now, the reliability scan, that green, now all the software has this, and this is a really great way to double check. You're checking, you're rotating your model, making sure all the crucial data is green. All the crucial data. For instance, is this crucial? Oh, heck no. So if I scan the rest, like Eric was, it doesn't have to be perfect. If I'm missing a couple of data here, as long as I'm not missing the occlusal parts where it's going to interdigitate, I'm not missing the buccal where it's going to affect how the models come together, you got it. You got it. Again, we're presenting more perfect stuff. And again, I'm scanning most of this on a type-it-down to show you, so I can be pretty perfect. Anyone can be, okay? But real life, a little different. Know what is important to capture in the scan. That's the key. So now you're scanning the opposing. And again, what's important? The occlusal surface is very important. Interproximals, not so much, okay? Buccal surface, very important. Why? Because that's how the computer is going to read to put the models together. So I see the blue, it's the buccals. I could use a little more data that the software is telling me. Well, I'll just scan the buccal. And again, here I'm being a little crazy and getting a little, I don't need those interproximal areas, but for this, I wanted it to look good. Now, what Eric alluded to before is, at this point, checking reliability, all the key areas I have. Now, at this point, why not stop here? Why not send it to lab? And what Eric was talking about, the cleaning up process is actually important. And I've always cleaned up my models from day one. I don't know what it was back in like 2005. I've always been cleaning my quadrant models. And I didn't know why I was doing it. I was just doing it because aesthetically, I thought it was better, more pleasing looking. But from a lab point of view, with all that crazy data out there, it's hard. And I'll show later, Eric, I have some pictures of the model work and why it's important. It doesn't take long in the software to just remove that excess stuff. It takes maybe 5 or 10 seconds to literally do it. And when you do it, the lab has a lot easier time working with your models. So that's another key. As far as bite registration, it's usually a zigzag. For anyone who knows anything about scanning, you're just kind of stitching it back and forth, up and down, up and down. It's stitching those models together. And really gives you a nice scan. So in this particular instance, we're going to do that, and it's just going to scan, and it hasn't read enough data, and then boom, it snaps when it has enough data to identify, and then it'll snap the other arch when it sees enough data, and then you're done. And I always then scan a little more of the bite because the bite is so critical. I'll scan a little more down the arch, not as soon as it snaps. I'll scan a little bit more, and then you can see you can even check and see that you have nice interdigitation with the models, okay? And this is what the lab gets, right, Eric? So if you get this, right, you get the bite template, bite scan, and you get the upper and lower. Can you tell if the bite's off?
Yeah, very easily. So in general, if you're taking a bite properly in the software, we can tell immediately if you're getting it right, because we can see if the occlusion's proper. We can see if things are actually in occlusion, if they're out of occlusion, if the case is actually bitten through. In those situations, we know that there's something funky going on, and then we can always rely on the actual scan of the bite itself to realign things. So if we have that bite scan, we're in good shape over here. But if there's no bite scan, and we're relying on the STL sort of maintaining those coordinates of the bite, then there's situations where we have to then readjust the bite in the lab with our software. And while that's not always perfect, our techs are super experienced, and they'll see immediately if things are proper and they're not. If they're not proper and we need to get a bite from the doctor, then that's easy to do. We can just, of course, realign that thing in the software, and we're good to go. But in general, it's rare that we can't deal with cases that aren't perfect in the lab because the software has things to overcome those situations.
Right. And I have here, color. The color is what they call PLY file. And in your settings, you have the ability to send these to the lab. If you haven't changed your settings, you're probably going to get the gray file sent to the lab, which really doesn't matter. We're going to show the differences in a little bit, but that's a settings thing. There's, like I said, there's a ton of settings in these things. So make sure you take enough data for a solid bite. If you're scanning a full mouth, full arch, and you just do one side, this could be the resulting bite, which we know isn't accurate. Always scan the opposing side. Here I did a little more. I scanned in the front on this patient. And then I got this occlusion, which we know is more accurate. Okay, so when you're doing a full arch, scan the other side. And in the software, if you look down here, like other softwares, okay, it asks you to scan the right side and then scan the left, because it knows this will happen. And it wants you to get this result. So again, knowing your software, practice. Here's the bite scan on these little typodont things, and this is very interesting. Okay, so I'm doing it. It's snapping the models slowly but surely together, and I do one side. And once I did the one side, I checked, and of course the occlusion looked horrible. We know this is not the occlusion, and this is mounted typodonts. Very interesting. Mounted typodonts on a hinge, so it's not going anywhere. So it even picked it up in something like that, which I thought was crazy. So then you do the other side, and then it gave an even occlusion. But it's funny, on a typodont, these mounted typodonts, there's no occlusion. It doesn't really hit it. If you look, they barely hit. Some front teeth were mostly the ones that hit on this one. So it picked up that there was really no occlusion. But that's the point of doing on both sides. Okay, and what you'll have is you have an occlusal analysis, which you should always use, which is down there. In different software, it's going to be different places, but it's going to give you this. And this is really important for a lot of reasons. For people when we do full mouth reconstructions, you really have to pay attention to the bite. You have to pay attention to interfering areas, the interferences in teeth, and making sure the curve of Wilson is paid attention to, and all those great things. This will give you so much information. And the more information just makes it better. So what are your choices? Scanners versus in-office. In the beginning, we only had like one choice, right? One system was out there, right? Now, this reminds me of adhesives. When I started doing cosmetics in the early 90s, there was like one or two adhesives out there. Now there's hundreds of adhesives. And I'm assuming it's going to be the same way with scanners. So how do you choose a digital scanner? Well, do you want to just send scans to the lab? Well, that's easy. Then you buy a scanner. It's just it. There's plenty on the market. Get trials of all of them. Figure out what works for you. Look at the pricing. Look at all that kind of stuff. And then make an evaluation. Okay, tons of scanners. Do you want to make restorations in office as well? Well, then there's only like 2 or 3 choices. Okay, and again, look at the cost. Look at ROI. You know, on average, and don't quote me on this, but on average, if you're having an in-office system, you probably have to do close to 20 restorations a month for it to be somewhat profitable. I could be wrong. Maybe there's other data out there. So if there is other data out there, please send it to me. I'll give you my email address at the end. You'll see, because I'd love to see the data. But for me, that's how when I look at my ROI, I have to do about 18 to 20 a month for me to push profit. If I do less than that, it's not a problem. Now, my system is paid for, but when it wasn't, that was an issue. Okay. Ortho aligners. If you're doing ortho aligners only, if that's why you want to get a scanner, there's really, if you're locked into Invisalign, then the iTero system is really the only one, as far as I know. Now, I do invisible retainers, but I don't use Invisalign. I use another system called Trio Clear, which actually Microdental makes, and I can use the Medit scanner. You can use, if you're not using Invisalign, I'm not sure, actually, I don't know, but most orthodontists seem to have the iTero and use Invisalign. I don't know if you can send those scans for other retainers if you're using an iTero, but a lot of orthodontists have the iTero for their reason. For smile design, Eric, do you have a lot of doctors utilizing this stuff?
Very few. I mean, there's certainly some doctors that are high cosmetic doctors that use this on occasion, but it's pretty infrequent.
Yeah, and the time factor to me is it's really time consuming, and who's doing it. And remember, anytime you're delegating something to a staff member, you're paying somebody to do it. So if you have an in-office system and you're delegating it all to staff, it's like having a ceramist in your office. So you are paying. So the cost is not just the block. The cost is the time it took the staff too. But most people don't really realize about those hidden costs. Maybe because you hate taking impressions, and that's totally valid. Just understand that 100% of the people can't be scanned. There are some cases which are very difficult to scan. Sure, you could do it, but it would be quicker to take an impression and have your lab digitize the impression. You want to be the cool kid? That's me. I'm not the cool kid, but I wanted to be. Eric, I'm not the cool kid, am I? All right. Well, anyway, are you unsure about digital scanners? And that's okay. And this is something Eric was talking to me about, and I didn't even realize about choosing a digital scanner. But he's like, it's like, what operating system do you prefer? Right, Eric?
Yeah. So the way I like to think about this is there are certain doctors that are going to like certain systems because of the way, it works with your office and how intuitive it is for your office. That's like me. I love Mac computers. I use them at home. I use them as much as I can. And I prefer that workflow. If somebody gives me a PC and tells me I have to work on PC for the rest of my life, I'm going to be pissed. But in situations where you have an opportunity to pick what you like because it sort of fits with the way you like to do this or the workflows, then you can just pick what you like. But I think it's really like picking OSs. You're going to have Mac guys and you're going to have PC guys, and you can't convince either one of them that either one of them is better. So it's just about trying out the systems and seeing what works.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm a Mac guy too, so I hear you. So let's talk about troubleshooting, utilizing and troubleshooting digital scans. Now, before we start this, I want you to use a different perspective if you're a dentist out there. And the different perspective is you are now the lab. You're not the dentist, you're the lab, and you're receiving these scans. What would you do?
Chris,
Yes.
I think we're running a little bit over, so just to be respectful of folks' time.
Yeah, we are running. This is the last section.
Yeah.
We're just going to go over a bunch of scans, and we're pretty much done. So I don't know, 5 to 10 more minutes. Is that okay?
Probably, yeah. I think we're probably,
I talk slow.
yeah, like 5 minutes is good, I would assume.
Okay, so let's punch through these. I want to use a different perspective. You're no longer a dentist, you are the lab technician. So let's understand the laboratory process. This is when Eric would show me what he would do. He'd get a scan, he'd have to clean it up so it can be printed on a base. And Eric came up with this articulating resin base, which I thought was great. It's a tripod. It's on both sides. It has a stop and right in the center of the palate. So you see the total front, the total buccal surface of the teeth. I thought it was great. So kudos to you, Eric.
Thank you, sir.
That was nice. So Eric, you get this scan. What do? You got to make a phone call. That's what came in. This is the digital file that came in, right?
Yeah. So in a situation like this, there's 2 ways to go about it. In a lot of situations, we can't get a new bite for that. We don't want to necessarily have to call in the patient for this. If the bite looks like it's something we can maintain or just hand articulate, I can print out both sides of this and then we can hand articulate it just like any traditional impression. So in situations like that, we're not in a situation where we can't use it at all. We have to redo the impression or something. We can use these in some cases, but it's certainly best to make sure they're in occlusion.
Right. And then you have a case like this, which you show up. Can you find the margin? Now, as dentists looking at this, I'm having a hard time finding the margins. Now, he's just put it the last discernible part of the tooth. This is a bridge. This is a big bridge someone's asking for. This is not good. It looks like their scanner wasn't clean from the texture issue. The tissue wasn't managed properly. There's a lot of things going on wrong here. Not to say that I haven't done the same thing. I'll admit, like, I'm not perfect in it by any stretch. Look at my hairline. But this is not acceptable. Something like this, when you were talking about the dirty scanner, Eric, I'm thinking, well, what's all this junk? This is
that could be light distortion or distortion from a clean or dirty window on the scanner.
And all this stuff is like super basic stuff that we just forget. Like, of course we want a clean scanner too, but sometimes we forget, and sometimes it gets, maybe a little dirty, and it's put in the sterilizer, and you take it out, and you don't see it. Stuff happens. Again, unclear margins, very, very hard to discern on this case. It's just, and you're asking your lab. If you're the lab tech getting a scan as a dentist trying to identify this, you're pulling out your hair, and again, you look like this. So, it's kind of crazy that way. So, missing data, another thing. There's a lot of missing data. Like, where's the data you're missing? You're missing an interproximal, and that's the key area for this, isn't it? You're missing all this interproximal data. How are they going to give you contact? Well, the lab calls you and they go, make it work. So then you have to grind this into place, because you're going to have an open contact, or you're going to have to grind it to be in place. And I'm just not big on those intraoral adjustments in front of the patient. I think I should do my job right, and it should drop. And that's how I view things. And maybe that's unrealistic, but that's how I've tried to work in my office for over 3 decades. So here's some more scans. Another poor technique. It's a poor technique because you're not practicing scanning, and you're going in there and waving it around. This is not someone who's bad at what they do. They're using bad technique, and they guarantee they haven't practiced it very often. So it's all about reps. Okay, again, if you make the lab's job hard, it's kind of like the hygiene patient who comes in, and it's the patient who came in just say for a crown, and they just ate lunch, and there's food all in their teeth, and you're like, what the heck? Can you clean your mouth? It's kind of like that. Okay, like, come on, send me something good. Send me a good scan. The double scanning, and this is a shame, because I saw this and I said, well, the clinician knew what they were doing. Full arch, it was a bridge. They didn't give like a little quad impression. But look at this double scan. It's a shame. You're not gonna have a clue, right, Eric? Again, edentulous scan. Someone sent me, Eric, right? Like, what do you do with this? This is the good thing is this is like not someone who's been prepped and has temps on. The dentist can call them back and go, okay, we got to rescan. And here's what I would say. If I sent in this scan to you, Eric, I would call the patient and go, the lab messed up, man. The lab dropped the file. They didn't, damn lab, I got to get you back in scan. And the patient goes, okay. So
Yeah.
I'm going to blame you, Eric. Why am I going to take that? So, yeah. And this is just interesting because most people think, and in conversations with you, Eric, this is enlightening for me because, one of the values of having these digital scans is like, oh man, I can identify the margin even quicker because it's color. Not quite so. And so here's you trying to identify a margin, right?
Yeah.
And it's tough because it's blurry as you get closer, right?
That's exactly right. So I think that while the PLY files are great for sort of giving us an idea on where something might be, a tooth structure might be, it's not the best for deciding on where the margin is because of what you're going through right now. You're seeing where the tooth structure is not really actually the tooth structure or the margin. So you might mark the margin long, it might be short, just based on that scan itself. So I always say to look at the grayscale scan and then approve that before sending. Don't look at the color scan and assume that just because you think you can see the margin at that with the color scan that it's going to be proper. As you can tell by going back and forth between grayscale and color, it's not as clear as you might think it would be. So it's more like a graduation between tissue and tooth rather than a perfect margin. So you can't necessarily use that to mark the margin.
Right. And I think technology, like what we've seen, some new technology that's pretty impressive coming out, I think this might not be an issue in the future, but right now it is. So just be wary, always check the gray. Now here, you could see this. I mean, we're looking at this as a dentist. I'm trying to identify the margin. I'm running can you see my cursor, right? I'm running along and this is where the tooth color and the gingiva meet. So I'm thinking that's all my margin. So I'm going to put my margin there. Well, if I put my margin there and then I go to the grayscale, which will really show me, I missed the buccal margin.
Yep.
And so those are the things that you have to understand. The lab has to go through all this stuff. And until they know you and know your preps, they might have an issue. They might have a problem.
Yeah, in that scenario, I don't think any lab would necessarily have a problem with that because we would see that, and we're used to being able to mark margins appropriately with intraoral scans. We've been doing it for 15 plus years here, maybe 20 years. So it's margins are usually not an issue for us unless there's problem scans.
Good to know. All right, and this is placing your margins equal or super gingival, whatever possible is always. I mean, this person didn't really have to retract a whole heck of a lot, and send in some good stuff. And this is more of like a realistic scan. And maybe there's a little buccal blemish there, but I'm sure you can get around that. But if you look here, well-articulated models, no. Did they capture those interproximals and towards more the anterior teeth? I mean, the bites and the can't? No. But this works. They have all the crucial data. So that's what I mean with you're seeing perfect because I'm using a Typodont. This is realistic. If you're sending in this all the time, they will love you. Right, Eric?
Yep.
So remember, life is too short to be unhappy. Smile while you still have teeth. I thought that was good to throw in there. So here's a question for all of you, because modern dental and microdental really are committed to making this this digital adaptation for dentists easier and easier. So I have a question for you guys. What do you want to see? They want to know. So let them know. Email them. I'm going to give you some emails at the end. Do you want to see more training on specific scanners or scanners in general? Troubleshooting webinars, Zoom or in-office training, forums of some type, or something else? What do you think would be great to enhance your digital expertise or adaptation or transition to digital? I would really like to know. Again, I want to thank the sponsors, Microdental Modern and Colten, very much. And most of all, you for spending some time with us. Again, I want to talk about that special offer for Colten in case you missed the promo code. They're very nice to do this. Thank you very much. Great material. You won't regret using it. I really love it. So we discussed a bunch of stuff here, and hopefully you got some answers. I know I see some questions and stuff, so we'll start fielding those. But if you're wondering why, if you looked at the promo picture for the webinar and I had all this hair and I have this now, it's because of those two right there. Kids are great, but you know, your hair goes thin because of it. And little shout out for the Trio Clear. Before my daughter went off to grad school, she of course didn't wear retainers after braces, so she had some residual crowding happen, and she got the Trio Clear. She loves them. She calls me. She's, you know, and she's like, oh, they're looking great. My teeth are nice and straight. So Trio Clear. This is why I don't necessarily am tied to it like an iTero. I can use a different scanner and just send it into a lab and get my things there. So
Awesome.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate everyone spending some time with us. Thank you, Eric, very much.
Very welcome.
I wouldn't know the majority of stuff I presented tonight if it wasn't for Eric. So I want to thank you.
I call BS on that.
Here's my email. If there's some questions you're asking that I don't think we might not have time for all of them, right, Maxwell? Send it to my private email. And yes, I'm old school. I got AOL going on in the house. But you know, Tin at Microdental and Miss Danielle Teague at Colten, the clinical education manager. Shout out to these people if you have any questions about stuff, and send Tin all those questions, or maybe future webinars you want to see on the digital platform. Be great. So thank you all so much. Really
Let's
appreciate
hit these questions real fast.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you guys, Eric and Dr. Pescatore. That was a great webinar that we had. Thank you everyone for sticking around. Let's get to questions ASAP. From Dr. Vitale, have you done calculations on cost per case of a scanner versus impression materials? For a crown, the cost of impression materials is about $15, not counting the cost of chair time and staff salary.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I love how you're thinking, because I remember once when I had my first in-office CAD/CAM systems, because I went through 2 of them. I did that breakdown, and you know, I know they tell you the block costs this and that's your cost. No. It's the block. How I even computed the electricity it took to run the damn thing, the cost of the staining glaze, the cost of this, the cost of that. And I broke it down, and it's a lot more. Now, staff cost is different per office, okay? But yeah, I've done it. And if you really break it down, that's why you have to do more volume to make it a feasible thing for in-office CAD/CAM. You have to do more volume. If you're just doing a handful a month, and if you love doing it, it's a different ballgame. Then you buy it because you love doing it. But if you're looking for more of a profit, you have to do a lot more quantity. And staff cost is definitely out there. I don't know what people are paying staff members, okay? But that is a definite thing you need to say. And I love the way you're thinking. You're thinking like a businessman. You have to when you're buying this technology, because the bill doesn't quite end. You know, there's always upgrade costs and subscriptions and maintenance and all that. That's a great way to think. For me, doing the number of teeth I would do per month, most of the time it would pay. And every now and then, especially, you know, because I went through the recession of 2008 and then you had COVID, you know, sometimes it did pay for itself. But again, my system's been paid off a while, but sometimes it didn't. If I was still paying my lease, all those things, it wouldn't. I'd have to do a certain amount of teeth, and every office is different, but I think around the 18 to 20 teeth a month is probably accurate. Hope I answered it. If not, shoot me an email and we can talk about it more.
Thank you, Doctor. Another question that we have coming in from an anonymous attendee. You mentioned you still use analog impressions. Can you give sample scenarios on when you had to send traditional over digital impressions?
Well, in the case I showed where I'm doing these in-office one-visit restorations, I always use analog. I always use traditional impression material with the digital scanning just so I have a model quickly. I don't necessarily use my resin printer every time, because to ditch a die, create a die with a resin printer and print it out and stuff, I can just do the model much quicker. Other times where I'm going to take a complete impression is people, like if I'm doing, say, an upper like 10-unit veneer case, if I can't maintain that tissue the way I would like, I tend to always take a traditional, because I'll get the physical attributes of the traditional material to help. And sometimes people are very difficult when they're numb and stuff to really scan well, especially with bigger cases. So in those types of bigger cases, I tend to not go to the scanner as my first thing. And maybe it's just me. Maybe I just find it easier, or maybe I'm being lazy. But I think for the bigger cases, I tend to use more traditional analog, and the smaller cases, more pure digital.
Awesome. We have a raised hand from Dr. Proska. I'm going to not unmute your mic, but allow you to talk, Dr. Proska, so please feel free.
Can you talk?
If you can hear us, Dr. Proska, you have full permission to unmute your mic. But if it was also an accident, then no problem. We're going to move on to another question and come back.
Okay.
Another question that we had in the chat, I saw that it was already answered. Another one is from Dr. Shosh. Can we get more even toolist training?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
She was asking, can we get more even toolist training?
Okay.
I believe, yeah.
Okay, that's good to take note for. Sure.
Another question that we had. Will Modern give feedback if your models are good?
What was that?
Actually, I don't think that is a question that Dr. Pescatore can answer, Dr. Shosh, but if you
I can comment on that.
Okay.
So yes, I would say if you're new to scanning and you're sending in new work, that I would communicate with a lab or somebody like me directly on the first 5 or 10 cases. If we're in good communication on the first 5 or 10 cases, then I would bet we can get in a situation where all the scans from then on out are going to be very good.
Also, Gina with Microdental mentioned that you can contact the Digital Advantage team. Gina, if you'd like to leave your email, we can also share that with the chat for those who are still here and available. And thank you for answering that, Eric. Another question that we have from an anonymous attendee, I'm assuming that we're referring to the learning curve of scanning, but they said, can you speak to the learning curve?
I can speak to that if you like, Chris. On learning curve, it goes hand in hand with the last question. So I would say for about the first 5 or 10 cases, be in direct communication with the lab. And I think if you take that feedback and we can kind of help guide that, after about 5 or 10 cases, we're in a situation where those successive scans are going to be in good shape.
And if I can add, part of the reason when I was talking with Eric, a good reason to do a webinar like this, or even more on training, is because, with so many scanners hitting the market and like everyone buying scanners, the one thing that we think has been lacking is real training and people knowing they have to put real time in to train and do these things. So it's not that people are bad and they're sending in bad scans. It's they think they have enough training and they really don't, because no one's really told them. That the people selling them a scanner like, thanks for buying it, and maybe here's some online training, but you got to really got to go through it and do it. And when you think you know how to do scanning, you got to do it some more. I mean, like I said, I've been doing it for over 17 years, and there are still times I go, what the heck did I do? Like, I just scanned that. Oh my God. It's because it's a constant learning process. Every mouth is different. People talk about, oh, you want a scanner because people gag from impressions. You don't think people gag from this? I mean, let's be realistic. So I think the more training that there's, like I said, so many being sold, and it's like so many being sold, and the training's here, and we got to get the training up here.
Agreed.
Okay, another question that we have coming in from Dr. Choi. What are the pros and cons of same-day crowns like CRIC Prime Scans or Prime Mill?
Well, I can't speak to Sarah because I don't have it anymore. I have another system. But I think just in office in general, the pros and cons, I mean, say, is that what question, pros and cons?
Yes, sir.
I mean, here's how you have to look at it. I mean, it depends why you're getting it. For me, I like to get it because I always thought to myself, God, if I wasn't a dentist, I would be a lab technician, because I really like the whole process of making the teeth and all the whole thing. So for me, when I make a tooth, to me, it fulfills maybe a creative process for me. But how your office has to be really set up to do these efficiently. And when someone says, oh, I can do it in this when I hear people talking about speed, I know for a fact what that final restoration is going to look like a glorified temporary. And that's just the facts. It takes time. If you look at, and I have a lot of friends in the CAD/CAM community who have in-office systems, and they do courses on it and take pride. And their stuff looks like the most gorgeous stuff in the world. And that's the goal, really. So time-wise, it varies. If you rush it, it's not going to look as good. If you let the computer do all the work for you, like, oh yeah, press this button, it does the margin. Press this button, it puts the tooth there. Press this button, it does the occlusion. You're going to get so-so results because the computer doesn't know. You have to just go in there, manipulate things a little bit to get them really well. Every office is different in how you run. And like I said, you got to look at the ROI. You got to look at, is a staff member going to do it? If so, do they want to do it? Do they want to be trained? Because if they don't want to do it, don't force them. It's not going to come out well. Did that answer it? I hope. Who was that? James?
Yes, sir. That was Dr. James Choi.
Jimmy. I know Jimmy. Is he the periodontist? If he's the periodontist, he's a great periodontist. I use him. So
another comment that we have coming in, or another question may have said, can you comment on Intuit scans? Does the lab see more of this? And what's the quality and accuracy look like?
On edentulous scans, we do see some. We don't get a ton of them, but we do get them. As long as the scan technique is used properly, meaning you want to make sure you get like the analogy of throwing the ropes across the canyon before you build the bridge. Make sure you're scanning the entire arch, in one pass, then getting the details. We do get good results that way. The most scanners are capable of doing it now. There's some scanners that don't do a great job of it. But in general, newer scanners or newer tech will give you good results in edentulous cases.
those are probably the toughest scans, don't you think?
Yep. There's no real landmark. It's hard to get good landmarks. So stitching that arch is a little more difficult, but I've seen very good ones lately. So I think it really comes down to the tech used.
Yeah, I mean, the protocol for scanning edentulous is typically in the palate first,
yeah,
to get use the root eye and identifiable landmarks. It's a different pattern. It's a different type of scanning. And again, it's a more advanced level of scanning. I think when people start, they should start with quadrant stuff. Get super proficient at quadrant stuff, and then move on to full eye.